Chapter 4. Our Real Identity. The Child Guide. The Child Guide. The Shan analogy suggests that we are to get off our soft sofas and get up the mountain of understanding. That is, we are to get going here in the world to understand the nature of things, the world, life, and its lessons. It is one thing to rest on our objective, subjective laurels and talk about allness of God, and quite another to actually know what it is in thy sight and what is hidden from thee will be revealed. To understand what is before our eyes is to understand appearances. It isn't enough to call matter unreal, illusion, dream. It isn't correct to call matter spirit either, unless one can make himself understood so that others see the substance he sees. What is matter? What is light? What is government, really? What is the reason for the appearances of warfare, suffering, and pain? What is the reason for the presence of the physical sciences, mathematics, medicine, religion, metaphysics, and so on? To hang in with theology's view or philosophy's view isn't enough. What is our view? Do we know why dualism seems to appear so consistently despite the metaphysician's denial of it? Do we know why life appears to exist in finite, aging, struggling bodies? To be able to answer these questions is what is meant by climbing the mountain of understanding. Science is doing a much better job of that at the moment than either religion or metaphysics. The astronomer and physicist may be leaving God out of their equation, but they are coming up with answers concerning time and space, while metaphysicians are still denying their existence. To climb the mountain is to know the answers to everything pertaining to the scene at hand. It is to know what is before your eyes. I suspect that particular saying of Jesus was inadvertently omitted from the forming canon because organizing theologians were not willing to have neophytes perceive what a binding, confining doctrines they were being promulgated as much out of self-interest as out of love for truth. William, if the world is a mortal myth, why should I waste my time trying to understand it? Who is this one who has time to waste if time isn't real? If time isn't real, what is there to waste? Do you understand why the myth hangs on so tenaciously despite the thousands of years it has been spoken of as a shadow on the wall of a cave? Physical scientists, who make no mention whereof Godhead in their theorems, are measuring those shadows and finding themselves touching down on Godhead, almost as if they had backed up into it. If one measures the shadow long enough, he finds the tree it leads to, but he finds it in living fact, not metaphysical theory. Modern science is only now reaching the place the Hindu mystic reached 4,000 years ago, William. Yes, but where are you? The mystic climbed the mountain. He didn't merely profess to. He knew why the myth seems real. Science is climbing the mountain, and we know it because what they are finding is becoming applicable to quantum mankind. Here we are at Woodsong using their discoveries to record our voices. I know from my own experience that when the metaphysician does what he should, then he climbs the mountain of understanding beyond religious professions and metaphysical theory. His work also appears as a quantum benefit for all mankind, right here in the mythical world. So, how do we get going? How do we climb the mountain in actual fact? Even when we know about the metaphysical statement that there is no mountain to climb, we search for and find the genuine nature of ourselves, the child. The child within us will confirm who and what we are. That is what the mystics did to allow themselves to know about the myth of matter. Those mystics, in a marvelous way, changed the world. But there is no way to climb the mountain to its peak without the child, and there is nothing in churchdom, metaphysics, or science about the child. The child is within us, the very awareness that perceives the nature of God itself. The child and its guidance are essential in our search. If one thinks his religion, his philosophy, or his theology is the means to finding the final answer, he is mistaken. The child of light and love is the pathfinder, the guide, the way shower up the mighty mountain in Guangxi province. Science, religion, and philosophy can take us a great distance, but the child takes us to dominion. It is absolutely essential that we actually get in touch with that eternal child. How do we do that? Now we are coming to the reason for this book. At some point along the slopes of Shan, we realize we can't make it to the peak alone, even with the help of our studies, computers, and linear accelerators. We are not even sure which path to take. With so many books and people shouting that their way is the only way, our religion has failed to make the guide sufficiently real to us so that we can actually feel it and find it, confirm and follow it. Our metaphysics has done no better. With all its protestations of identity, self, allness, and allness of God's absoluteness, and those interesting ideas about the hem of things, in some agony and much frustration, often painfully, we finally come face to face with a glimpse of something that tells us about the child within. In desperation, longing, or suffering, we find that intuitive light wherein we are in the world along the slopes of Shan, and when the first feeble glimmer arrives, we have the intuitive feeling that it has been with us all the while, awaiting our recognition and call. Of course it has. It has come to us from the child within, the Christ light of us. I had to find the child on my own, as you must too, but I can be of considerable help, as you will presently see for yourself. Those who think they have found the child because they have found a religion or a subject of study that they are content with are mistaken. When we find the child, things become new. the entire world is seen in a new light. In the mind's eye, we can equate child with photon, which is also like the child within us, everywhere in space at once. The child is everywhere in our experience, not only available to assist our leanings and learnings, but leading us into and out of experiences in order that we may fully comprehend the nature of reality. The following, a conversation from some years ago. I was speaking with a group of theologians and metaphysicians who were hearing of the child within for the first time, as may be the case with the reader. The talk was intended to put a finger precisely on what the child is. My guests did not know that. I have often thought of this as the incredulous group because they were so astonished to hear what followed. One gentleman in particular was angered that he had come so far to listen to so much nonsense. The essence of that talk is printed here in some detail because everyone present eventually found the child and the marvel that comes with it. Now, years later, I know that such agreement doesn't always occur so quickly. Perhaps this particular choice of words had something to do with it. We were sitting outside under the loblolly pines of Alabama. Present were a physicist, a mathematician, a Christian Science practitioner, a venerable Roman Catholic nun with a scholar's knowledge of Christianity's origins, a young Buddhist monk, and a rabbi newly moved to this country from Europe. I was delighted to have such a diverse group, and not a little amazed that they had heard of this one hidden in the backwoods of the Southland. The talk begins. Good morning, everyone. This morning, if we can, let's put aside all our studies of truth. Let's put down our theology, doctrine, and metaphysics for a time. There is something much simpler and more important I'd like to talk about. Something much more basic, something that is absolutely fundamental if we are to go all the way with our spiritual comprehension. All right? Have we put aside religion for the moment? Science, physics, our over-concern with those complex things causes us, at least it caused me, to overlook something wonderful. That something wonderful brings us to understand new things about time and space, to see that we aren't as bound by time as we thought. Are you ready? Listen gently. There is a child inside us. It lives vigorously. It is as youthful as ever, and it hasn't lost a thing to time. What's more, that child is capable of resurrection and emergence right out here into this world of trials, tribulations, space, and time. Let me say something about this. We all know how much the world wants to know of this wonder, the child within, unable to find very much said or written about it. The Bible has something to say about the child, but the churches don't. The subjective groups don't mention it at all. But the child I'm talking about is not solely a religious or theological child, but the very kid we are, that is still deep within each of us, just as it was when we were children. Yes, there is a child still living in each of us. We've heard this before, but no one has gone into much detail. No one has written the really helpful things. For instance, who has told us that the child is all that is real about us? Who has told us that all this grown up, grown old, and grown tired of the world business isn't true and isn't the way things really are? And that the child within is the way things really are? Most mention of this mystical marvel is poetic, fluff and stuff, that rings true in the heart, but isn't sufficiently explained to grasp intellectually and practically. Ah, that's it. The intellect of us doesn't understand about the heart and the child, so it relegates them to another world. Well, since no one seems willing or able to tell of the child within to the grown ups, grown sophisticated, and grown old leaders of the world, I will. I have found the child I am, and I know what it is. Actually, so does everyone deep within. But the trick is to reach that deep within and get the child, so we feel it and know what it is. Hear this mystery. We are the child first, then we are the not child, and then we are the child again. We were children first. Those were the days we dimly remember, when fairy tales were real and Aesop's fables had their place in our thoughts of animals and forests, cabbages and kings, princesses, knights and frogs, and first stars to make our wishes on. Do you remember how you felt when you were a child? Would it surprise you to know you can feel that way again? Well, you can. Dr. Scott, you needn't look so surprised and shocked. You've come all this distance from your university to hear what I've found, so you may just as well relax and hear this old soldier out. You've listened for 2 minutes, and the look on your face suggests you know everything to follow. That's the way the intellect of us works in the world. We run our projections along a line and expect them to unfold that way. But, Doctor, are you quite sure there might not be something new to come out of this? I think you will see there is. Back to our youth and time. That was the time of our closest encounter with the original child. We were children then, and the inmost child of us was happy, even if the human view of childhood was miserable. The human view at this now moment includes a nearly infinite number of possibilities, and we are not stuck to just one line of unfoldment in time and space as most of us think. The original child's view may seem lost to us today, but it isn't. William, we all know of the advantages of childlikeness and the foolishness of childishness. Please hear this. I am not talking about childlikeness. I am talking about the child itself. I am certainly not talking about childishness. This is the furthest thing from that. The child we are speaking of now is the inner child. When we were young, lived by the outer child, by that husk of flesh. Now, we are to find that inner part of ourself again, because It plays the final and integral part in our search for the real. At the moment, just take my word for that, we are not searching for childlikeness and humility. We are looking for the child itself. That child is the real of us and is capable of taking us consciously back to reality. Nothing else can, nothing else will. Subjectively speaking, I've found that the inner child includes this body, this outer old bastard within it, for good and perfect reason. We will talk about that later. Talk about the child continues. Now listen gently. As children, we heard about adulthood and learned the advantages that growing up and growing old were supposed to proffer. Like everyone in the world, since the beginning of time, we bought that bill of goods. We longed to be big children because they could stay up late and go places and do things little folks couldn't. Furthermore, the thing called time assured us, we believed, that the adult would come and the child would pass away. So time was a divine plan. We locked ourselves into a sequential unfolding world time, and the burying process began. With shovel after shovel of adulthood and adultery, we buried the real child under a mountain of worldly sophistication, education, judgmentalism, self-importance, guilt, age, debility, and thoughts of approaching death. Now here we sit under the loblollies and look around. We groan, rub the stiff joints, and wonder where the years have gone. Whatever happened to that little child's view of things? It is gone, we think, without our really finding the truth, without having done much in the world, and without even thinking there might be something else besides the relentless march of time that buried the child in the first place. We seem to think the child we were lives only in memory, don't we? Oh, but the wonder is, Dr. Scott, the ageless child still lives within us, untouched by the world's trouble and the passage of time, untouched by those accumulated experiences and pains along the slope of the Shan, great mountain of seeking and finding. The child doesn't give two hoots in hell about physics, metaphysics, theology, cosmology, and the various schools of whatever the world gives us to study in and about. The child is untouched by guilt or by the suffering of age. He hasn't lost his memory. She hasn't lost either her grace or energy. There are no years lost to the locust, and that original little boy and girl of us is untouched by time. The child within us lives. By God, it lives. Doctor, you are watching my old friend Abraham wipe tears from his eyes. Do you wonder if perhaps the rabbi, with all his years and scholarly knowledge of the Talmud, isn't hearing and feeling something deep within himself at this moment? Listen, listen. Where do these tender feelings come from? Can you guess? It is the child that brings tears of insightfulness to our eyes. The rabbi feels the child. That child we feel within us is our faithful guide up the final worldly slopes of Dashan's peak. That child brought us together today to hear of himself. But the child of us must be recognized, acknowledged as living, and called for if we are to feel its presence returning within us. Some of the goop heaped on our human backsides is guilt. Most of the anguish of time and what time is believed capable of doing and expected to do. Much of our consternation has to do with lack or lost faculties, the dimming vision, slow reflexes, empty pocketbook, failing memory, and zip. But all of that is the great pile of lessons learned, which we have allowed via divine plan to hide the original child whom we have been deluded into believing we left behind years ago in time. Yet it is that same child within that gives us the lessons of time and space and makes them bearable. The injuries of those lessons aren't real in the absolute sense of non-time. It is the child that is real, and the child is miraculously untouched. What's more, and what's important here, the very purpose of our gathering, the child can return. It can make a comeback. We give it a hand and lift it up and put it back where it was before the burying began. The child lives and is still present to live us and walk with us through the events of the world straight home to full self-discovery. Ah, yes. What seems so interesting is that the simple, the troubled, and uneducated are going to find the child and believe it before the sophisticated and religious folks do, before the metaphysicians do. Dream stuff? My friends, this isn't dream stuff we are talking about here. At this late stage in the world, too much is at stake for metaphysical word games, philosophical and religious truths, and psychological upmanship. We haven't much time in linear time left to stand atop to Shan in conscious living fact. We are talking absolute reality now, truth, fact. More than that, we are saying something that everyone is going to find is true for himself, all alone, if only when his physical body stops responding to his every whim and is put aside in the experience the world calls death. I'm here this day to declare, for a fact, that one doesn't have to await the death of the body to find the child heart within himself, lifted up from the distant past and out of the binds of time, and become that one again. This gentle child within is quite willing to reanimate and revitalize the present body we seem to think are struggling and dying in. And we bring the child's wisdom and knowledge of reality back to our conscious recognition once more. Listen to me carefully. We are still quite capable of seeing and feeling with all the unencumbered joy and delight we felt as children. Absolutely. Still, right here in the world, no matter how old or how lost we think we are. Sweet, naive Pollyanna. Pollyanna must come to mind as one hears words such as these, as if this were her final stand in our affairs. This time, let's grab her. If she's the child, catch her quickly. The wise man will not hesitate to ask a small child of 7 days about the place of life. Those were the words of Jesus. Isaiah told of the child. Jesus identified as the child he found himself to be. We are to do the same. I doubt that many will want to understand these things until their enchantment with self-importance and adulthood has passed. Just as a soldier who has thrown grenades and fended bayonets understands what fear is and what peace is, youth doesn't understand the child until it has put it aside, buried it, and lost all trace of it for a time, thence to miss it and need it, then fortuitously, at a moment like this, come home to it again. Do you hear that? Come home to it again. Indeed, this is the purpose of adulthood, the struggling human experience and irrevocable move toward death and time. It's like the old man who went back to his home in the hills of Tennessee after working in a small town during the hard days of war. When he returned to the mountains, he knew what blue sky really is, and what a frisky thing a squirrel is, and what beauty actually is. When he got back to his clean, unspoiled hills, his was beautiful of memory turned into an is beautiful now again, and he began living the beauty that had gone unrecognized until he lived the ugliness of war. Well, now, listen closely again. We've lived our adulthood to total frustration for nearly 11,000 years of human time, time and time again, to no avail. So now, finally, we look within, find the child still alive, uncover it, listen to it, follow it, and that eternal child of God within, the Christ of us, takes us straight up the mythical mountain to the peak where we become that child beyond time in living fact for all our world to see and understand and do likewise. No, this is no Pollyanna tale being told here. This is a truth for everyone, old and young. These words sound one way to the intellect, but they feel quite another way to the listening, non-judgmental heart within us. And then, sooner or later, perhaps this day, the feelings come to confirm that it's true and to make it alive and real despite our sophistication and human importance, despite the gnarled fingers, stiff joints, dimming vision, and painful memories. Despite them, and despite the world of time and space. Ah, then, a miracle for some of us who choose instead of them. You see, religion has missed the mark ever so slightly. It has us awaiting a linear Christ in time, but the Christ light is closer than that. It is not only within us, it is us. Did you hear this? It is us. When we find that out, we comprehend clearly that the linear Christ of time confirms the child we are. Metaphysics has said nothing of the child whatever, has it? Subjectivism, for all its looking within, misses the child entirely and the child's equation. There is good reason for this, as we shall see later. The human experience. A recent conversation at Woodsong follows. The human experience is essentially the awareness of people, places, and things, specifically our own. Experience here and now. In the most absolute sense, our present experience is God's self-awareness, God's self-witness, self-acknowledgement, self-appraisal, self-utilization, and self-enjoyment. It seems to be ours, but it belongs to God. Overspreading this self-perception is God's knowledge of the contraries, what God is not, making what God is fully understood. To whom? To God's perfect self-image, the child we are. As we get this straight and begin to see the subjective idea, I am perceiving perception happening, I am awareness itself perceiving not but my own perfection, the correct identification becomes more and more the basis for our thoughts and actions. At this point, our experience begins to undergo greater changes. But Sam, this is the whole question. How do we go about making the proper identification become the basis for thought and action? Good question. How do we do this? By the conscious acknowledgement, knowledge acted on, that the ineffable, the supernal one, isness, reality, Godhead, is the only possible identity that actually exists and is, therefore, being this awareness I am here and now. Hanging on to this realization, we slowly let go the old sense of self. Who is the old one who says, my mind? We let that one go. Line upon line, the greater identity confirms itself, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. This is the first step toward the rebirth spoken of by those who know what they're talking about. When the child within, the God identity, is really acknowledged, it comes alive. We feel it. With this child that we actually feel within comes a simultaneous refutation of the old bastard's view of things and, blessedly, a natural forsaking of them. We also let go the thoughts and actions that supported the old man's position. Suspicion, doubt, judgment of others' motives, and many forms of judgmentalism simply vanish. Would you say this experience is essentially God's experience rather than mine? In reality, of course, and not just essentially, but totally. But at the same time, the world experience is the time we are still saying, this is my experience and that is yours. It is also the time we're saying, this is good and this is bad. From the peak of the mountain, identity discovered and proven, things under our feet are, for the most part, understood. At this high place, one looks in retrospect to see without doubt that nothing but God has ever gone on. We understand without equivocation that the world experience is our own, step by step, line upon line, discovery and confirmation of the fact of God's allness. Yet, the child within us, which is the Christ of us, allows us to suspect this a long time before we're atop the mountain in conscious fact. Inwardly, we're claiming that no identity exists but God, and doing this sometimes against great odds. Outwardly, we're slowly beginning to live judgelessly, to see good God in everything. Do you see? Hey, yes, I'm starting to understand. Yes, yes. The climber disappears. Here is something mysterious, Hans said. There is no way for the climber to stand atop to Shan. Do you know why this is so? A smile brightened Ho's face, but he said nothing. Lee gave him a poke, whispering, "You can answer that." "This is for you to answer," Ho said. Lee began hesitantly. "To reach the top of the mountain is to no longer be the climber." "Yes," said Han, clapping his hands like a child. "Exactly. Now tell me, when will you stop identifying as the climber?" "When I reach the top," Lee answered. "Oh, more quickly than that," Han said softly. "One is never the climber, really," Mary said. "The climber and the old man are one." "Then who are you, if you aren't Mary?" asked the soldier. "I am the child, the guide who takes me where it is." "You answer when I call you Mary," the soldier snorted. "Yes," the lady replied, "that's the name of this body, but it is not my name. This body is not all I am. I am so much more, and so is everyone. I know the child lives atop Dashan with one foot on the granite peak and one on greater mountain of no name. It was Mary's anguish that started my search, but the child led me beyond the limits of myself. The closer I came to the conscious top of the mountain, the less I was Mary, and the more consciously I became the child. Yet, had I not hailed the child from down the slopes, Mary would have never been understood and put off. "Ah, so," Han clapped his hands again, "you have found the child." "Maybe she's found the child," the soldier muttered, "but she still answers when I call her Mary." Letter to Laurel. Dear Laurel, yes, the child is the guide, ever available, closer than fingers and toes, our very selfhood. But all of us are humbled first. We are made to bow our arrogance and human dreams before something unseen. Then the child comes alive, pulling us, pushing us, kicking us up the mountain, past every human mess, past all the old temptations, through the most amazing, intricate, narrow pathway, which is one child wide. You are on your way, Laurel. The Christ child of your very selfhood will never leave you nor forsake you. And it is a mystery of mysteries. There is something marvelous, and it all has to do with our willingness to surrender the me sense to God and to accept self as subservient to Godhead. I know why this perception comes so slowly to metaphysicians and with such reluctant surprise. Because of the built-in metaphysical insistence that we, as the real identity, are God. Not so, not so, simply not so. We would like for that to be so, and we rationalize that it is in the name of God as all in all. But exactly as the carpenter said time and again, Only God is God, and we are the children of God. My Father is greater than I, yet my Father and I are one. The child is pure and perfect, without sore knees or high blood pressure, without tribulation, without a battle with age, time, space, world that it doesn't understand as good going on. And then see confirmation of that good. Ever since the beginning, the human problem was and has wavered between the same two ridiculous extremes: the attempt to be a separate selfhood apart from God, and the attempt to be God. Both end in the prolongation of the discipline, the world not understood. Lest ye become as children, said the one who had it straight. It is hidden from the wise, but revealed to the simple and childlike. Laurel, along the way I found the absolute which called God all. Then I worked very hard to make God all. Then I tried even harder to make Bill God. Then, brought to my knees, I found how nothing in itself Bill and Bill's world is, but how marvelous life is. Then I learned that life, awareness, belongs to God, and that awareness, life itself, is the child, the image of God. With the child's help, I somehow managed to let go the me sense who was trying so hard to understand God, and found myself already living as the child of God, holding God's hand every step of the rugged discipline's way. Suddenly, or precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, the world was revealed for what the world is, and I consciously became less Bill and more child. The absolute position of metaphysics is a step along the way, our most arrogant time. But the demand has ever been to learn life's lessons and let go the impostor who believes he owns life and its bodies. That word surrender is in all the holy books of the world, and it is an accurate word in my own experience, which is all I can really tell about. Yes, as you said, we let go our arrogance, our pride of accomplishment, our human attainments, even the pride in our lessons learned, and do it on this side of the grave if we really want to. But it takes doing, in actual fact. More than profession, it takes a real turnaround and return to the child heart within us. In dust and ashes, humility. You've done that, my gentle Laurel. Love takes in a stranger. The stranger is the child of God we are. In the tangible sense of limit, world, measure, time, and space, we, as a measuring mortal, are all brought to zero in this world or the next. The surrender is traumatic, but it is worth it. Upon the surrender to the ineffable, unknowable beyond time and space, we are shown a marvel of marvels and given a subjective world to reign over. Every word of this is true, as you are slowly and perfectly learning, Laurel. You've learned just as I did. We loose and unbind our world, doing for it as we can. That doing is essential. You have the strength, the means, and the ability to do what you are intended to do here in the linear world of time's unfolding. But we're brought to bow before God first, most of us in our extremity, and most of us unwillingly. This is true especially for those who have heard a different drummer and have hewn their own pathway in the world. Even that is as nothing before God. But becoming nothing before God becomes all powerful in the new world. You will see. It is amazing and wonderful. A journal entry. It goes a little like this, Father. We write in our journal one day, "Hey, come alive, child inside me." And then one day we find ourselves writing, "The child lives and is alive inside me." Finally, somewhere along the line we write, "Hey, by damn, I am the child." And we perceive the fictitious nature of the me who thinks the child is inside a physical body. That one was the deceiver and is nothing. Then, still later, as time goes to the not child, and when the child has been proven a reliable, honest guide up the mountain of searching, confirming that everything is God, we hear ourselves saying to those with ears to hear, "Hey, there's a child within who can explain things to you and save you from your anguish. Find it, live it. It will lead you to the original one, the Christ light of Godhead."